today I'm going to talk about professional game music creation and especially some tips for avoiding mistakes that I've commonly seen and that I've also made myself and learned through time. So hopefully there'll be some useful things to you guys. How many people here are audio people? Great. And how many of you are like in-house audio people at a company? And how many people are game developers? Cool. Nice. Okay, so I'll try to address the game developers too a little bit, and you'll get an inside peek on, some tips of how to make good game music. So I get emails and demos all the time from people like, hey, I want to join your company, or, will you give me your feedback, that kind of thing. And so out of those emails, I kind of hear a lot of common things that I just want to address, because I also see them in games that are still released. And I see them at all levels. I see them from really, well-known companies as well as really small indie companies. My goal is to make better audio throughout games. So, rule number 1, be in control of your sound, okay? We want to know dynamics. We want to know how to EQ, equalize. We need to know how to use effects properly, and we need to know how to use textures of instruments properly. Also, just know what you're doing in general. We need to talk about orchestration of instruments. We need to talk about music theory a little bit, and we need to talk about your technique, whether that be playing things in or however. So, make games, make developers, and make yourself successful. This is, I believe, how it works. Music is a huge part of the game experience, right? Is your music boring, fun, annoying, or beautiful? Okay, so fun, awesome, beautiful, engaging music, I think, makes players more immersed, makes them want to play again. They write better reviews, they tell their friends about it, more people buy it, more people make in-game purchases, the game is successful, your client is successful, they hire you again for the next game, right? So it's really important to make good music. So, rule number 1, don't make boring ho-hum melodies, I call them. Make something that's sticky, something that people will wake up the next morning and remember, something that you write and the next morning you'll still be humming it. So I have one little trick to write a good melody that I use sometimes when I can't think of a good melody. And a lot of you have heard this trick before, but it's called my secret lyrics trick, where you invent lyrics to a song where there really are no lyrics ever, but you know secretly what the lyrics are. So my fabulous assistant, Amy, is going to click on my famous secret lyrics trick. So this is a melody I had to write for an ice castle in an adventure RPG game. And the developer said, this is a splendid, beautiful, and cold castle. So I went, okay. And it's called Castle Chandelier. So I said, splendid, beautiful, and cold. Castle Chandelier is splendid, beautiful, and cold. What a castle. So every time I hear that, thank you. I've always wanted to sing in Taper Auditorium. So I know those lyrics when I hear them every time, and I don't do this with every song I write, but I do it when I get stuck and the developer has given me interesting words that roll off the tongue. And so that is my secret lyrics trick, so feel free to use that. Another thing that I do is I do weird theory things. So how many people are music theory savvy in here? Okay, cool, good. So you know what I mean. So this is a 12-tone row, which means you take all 12 chromatic notes and you arrange them in a certain order, and every instrument in this song plays at different rhythms in that exact order. So go ahead and play this. So that track was written for a creepy witch town where the witches are kind of avant-garde and silly. And so I really needed something totally different and unique with personality. So I used the 12-tone row to write that. So you can do some other things. You can put limitations on yourself. So say you're only going to use a fifth of an octave, or you're only going to use a third, or you're going to use a seventh, or whatever the range limitation is. Maybe you're going to use a high range that you don't normally use. Maybe you're going to use a super low range. Use a certain scale. So, start on 2 of the scale and write something in Dorian mode, that sort of thing, because you normally probably wouldn't do that. And then leaps are another trick. So all melody leaps have to be only minor thirds and perfect fourths, say. Or, it's good to put a step in there. So maybe whole steps and major thirds, something like that. And so up and down, you must follow that rule in any order. So that sort of thing sounds really bizarre and stupid, but it's a way to limit yourself so that you'll create something that you wouldn't have created normally. Yeah, like I said, is the melody singable? Is it playable? So is it singable is really important, especially in this culture. I think musically now, we're in this like American Idol culture / all of those shows, right? So everyone wants to like participate and sing and all of that. And so when people hear a melody that's like in their range and fun to sing, they're going to remember it a lot more than if you write something like, like super high, and it's like you can't sing along to it and it's awkward. So it's another thing to keep in a singable range. I'm not saying all game music has to be that way, but it's a way to make something hooky and catchy. And will you remember it tomorrow? That's what I said. When you compose it, are you going to sit around tomorrow saying, oh, what did I write yesterday? Or are you going to be like, oh, God, it's in my head, I can't get rid of it. And that's how you know you have a good melody. Okay. Next tip is don't emulate what I call a mezzo forte ensemble. So in other words, when you sit at your workstation and all the velocities of every note you enter default to 100, say, which is common, and you never change any of the velocities, and everything is just 100 all the time. I personally feel like 100 is a really boring velocity to have anyway. I mean, I would rather have like 127 on everything, because at least it's like full of personality in your face. But having really, really low velocity for a whole section, like maybe 60 or 70, it's all the instruments timbre change. Hitting a piano really hard is such a different sound from lightly pressing it. My piano teacher in college told me, the first thing I sat down and she said, now, Aaron, the piano is an ugly instrument, and your job is to make it sound beautiful. And that was really interesting to me, and I realized, part of this is the whole, like, people are banging on it all the time, and it's so beautiful when you touch it lightly. But yet, all these samples are available with so many velocity, different velocity samples, and we're not using them enough in the low areas. So yeah. Mezzo forte ensembles are all over the place. You see orchestras, you see choruses that just sing all the time at the same dynamic, and it's just not musical. So if you want to make something musical, you have to vary the volume, you have to vary the velocities. So you can do this. You can do this by controller draw in your workstation, and I do it all the time, where I just draw whatever shape I want. I do it for thick textures like an entire string section, but I also do it sometimes for single notes. So if there's a suspension or something, or an anticipation or something like that in the melody line where it's dissonant for a moment, I'll give it a double hairpin, because then it brings that out and makes it really lovely. And it sounds like a voice, like, breaking out from the dawn or whatever, So also just having quiet sections in your pieces. So, even a loud battle song or something like that, make a little tender moment, because that pulls different emotions out of the player. And I think emotions are a good way to get someone dragged into a game. So I have 2 clips here The first one, Unto the Breach, is just, it shows some different dynamic levels, and in the end, it's like, oh, finally we're at the full loudness, where you think you already kind of were at the full loudness. So you heard a couple things in there. One is you heard like different suspensions coming in and out where I just tweaked one note. And then you heard like, the very end is like, oh wow, it gets louder. And it's a fun technique to like go up to 110 for a long time and then bring it up to 127 all of a sudden. And it's like a good surprise. So this next one is just really loud, exciting, and then, oh, a little quiet section. All right, so the next tip is don't forget about your panning, location, location, location. So I get a lot of tracks that are all like in the center. And I remember I don't know how old I was, I don't want to date myself, but a young kid playing Game Boy, and I would use headphones and play the Game Boy, and I was just fascinated by how this sounds, because that was my first like console or whatever with headphones. You don't play NES with your headphones. So it was like amazing to me how I heard everything in, in different ears, like fascinating. So I've always been really in tune to panning. So you can think really traditionally, like orchestrally. This little diagram comes out of a great book, by the way, called A Guide to MIDI Orchestration. It's the same one that someone mentioned at GDC, and I was like, I have that book. So it's actually, did I bring it? It's somewhere. Oh, no. I don't know where it is, but anyway, I have it somewhere. It's a fabulous book. Look it up. So they have a lot of like little things like this. So this tells you where the different sections sit in an orchestra, and you can pull this up on Google too, of course. So you can use this, or you can do your own thing, but do have a plan. That's one of the things I do is I look at all the tracks that I have, and I think, well, where do I just want to hear that? And sometimes I listen to it, and I say, I really hate that the trumpet is over there with the flute. Like, I need that to move. Because it depends on the composition. You might have a melody here and a counter melody here. You don't want to put the melody and the counter melody here necessarily, because they're not going to bounce back and forth and be really interesting. But yet, tight harmony stuff you want to maybe keep together. So don't hard pan things. That's another thing I hate. When people put like 100% over here, 100% over there, it's rarely ever going to be something you want to do. There are all sorts of tricks where you can pan, double something on each side, and that's different. But if you're just hearing it from one side, it's a little too extreme. So I really say not more than like 60% maybe on one side. Oh, and beware, because some samples, depending on what you're using, are already panned. They're already stereo samples. And so a lot of people make the mistake of like, oh yeah, I have this violin, I'm going to put it over here, like a little bit maybe, but it's already panned over there. So now when you pan it over there, it's like super duper panned over there. So you might want to just listen to that track by itself, like just solo everything and make sure that everything is in the middle, because you might not need to pan it, or you might need to change the settings on that patch. One thing that I like to do in most tracks that I do is I randomize one track. So I'll oftentimes something like hi-hat is fun to do, like all over the place. Or a tambourine. It's not necessarily realistic, but it's really fun. Sparkly sounds, so glockenspiel or harp or just little techno-y sounds. Like literally draw controllers and just go like this. Like draw them everywhere. Like randomize the whole thing. It makes it really fun. So that's what I did in this little clip here for Raccoon Jump, which is a lot more techno-y than the other stuff that you've heard so far. Oop. Here. There we go. It's okay.
I don't have it.
Just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. There you go. You got it. So all those little boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, they're all just like randomly bouncing around. So, and everything else is set. So that can be a fun technique. Next, know your orchestra. Don't write things that are impossible for the orchestra to play, unless you're doing that intentionally. But a lot of people make the mistake to like make a flute play really, really low around middle C, like really loudly, and that just doesn't happen. It's very unnatural. And of course, most samples won't let you do that sort of thing, but a lot of them will. So another big thing that I love doing is insert natural breath moments in any wind instrument, because all these players, unless you can do circular breathing, you only have so much air, and then you have to stop. So I see all these legato lines with flute, and they're just like da 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 da, and it just keeps going. And when I hear that, I'm like, that's not possible. Please take a breath. And besides that, musicians naturally phrase things. And if they're good musicians, they have long phrases, right? But some people have short phrases as well. But that's another topic. But if you don't put breaths in there, there's no moment of oh, this is a little moment, this is a little phrase, this is now we're on to the next phrase. And it's not possible to do. So, choose proper keys. I'll never forget when I wrote something in I think it was A flat and gave it to a violin player, and they were just horrified by it. And then it's as easy as, okay, just put it in A natural, because they love sharp keys. And once you learn that, it's oh. And so actually, if someone has perfect pitch, it's a very niche audience, and they're playing your game and they're a violin player and they know oh, this is a flat key, ugh, they just won't like it. It's just not natural. It's not what normally happens in the world of composing. And then, horns and clarinets and a lot of wind instruments like flats. So you don't want to give them a lot of sharps. Something to know. So know the ranges of instruments. Again, that book that I mentioned, Guide to MIDI Orchestration, all the ranges are in there. You can Google it too. Know the natural timbres and volumes of different ranges. Like I said, flute doesn't speak very loudly down low, that sort of thing. Bassoon is very plaintive and high, or screechy up high, but it can be tender if used right. So that is that tip. Next. Careful of bad loops, because I hear this all the time in games, and it drives me nuts, where I hear the loop point, right? Or there's a little pause or a little blip or whatever it is, and it drives me nuts. So one thing I like to do is I keep the texture thin at the end of the loop in general. So I don't want a big, huge orchestrated large texture and then back to some little, oh, it's just a little piano solo, because all of a sudden all those strings aren't going to fade out. They're just going to stop, and it's going to be very jarring, and it'll get really repetitive. Because if people can sense the loop, they sense, that it's getting repetitive. If they can't sense the loop, it's probably going to have a lot more chance of not getting annoying. So another thing that I like to do, I was going to say too, if you want to end with a big texture, start with the big texture. Okay, make sure that you're starting and ending with the same instrumentation. so that's not noticeable. So another thing I do all the time is what I call the natural musical fade out, where you actually have built into the music and the loop, you have like three quarter notes of rest or something like that. So you don't even really perceive it because you would expect there to be silence there. So that's what I did in this next track, the evil team march. That's the loop. So when you do that kind of thing over a long, texture, they're not even noticing that that's the loop point. Especially if you have another moment like that in the middle of the piece where there's some, moments of rest. So make harmonic sense. Know your chords: 2-5-1, 4-5-1, whatever sequences you're using. Because so many times I hear like this weird, okay, what you were in the key of 3 and now you're going back to 1. Like all of a sudden, it's very jarring. So 5-1 is very common. You have the like so loop, do, that kind of thing. It's very common. Another thing that a lot of developers are doing lately is they're doing a lot of shorter loops. So instead of 1 minute loop or 2 minute loops or something like that, they're doing like 30-second loops, but like 5 of them. So this way they can randomly play them in any order. So at this point, looping becomes even more important because you have to loop all of them to each other. So this is another way to basically make the soundtrack interesting and not get repetitive. And this is something I'm seeing a lot. I don't know if you've seen that too. So just also be aware that MP3s can definitely ruin your looping because they store tag information. And so I always deliver WAV files to clients. And if they want something in another format, I'll deliver that too. But I always keep everything in WAV because once they'll go and like change the formatting of everything to MP3 without telling me and put it in the game and send it back, and then all the loops are totally wrong, but they don't even notice. And it's like, okay, let's start over. Let's do this another way. And there are ways to, like, this happens a lot in Flash games because there's a very long noticeable gap. But there's a way to embed MP3s in Flash that some developers know and some don't. And so it's amazing how, one developer, it loops fine. And so they, like, basically create the MP3 within Flash. And so it accounts for all of that programmatically. But other times they turn it into MP3 and then just throw it onto the Flash, and that doesn't work. So, and I'm not a programmer, so that's not my thing, but I can certainly, advise developers of that if you run into this. Okay, so in general, I want you to be playful, inventive, engaging, and surprising. Just definitely have fun. I mean, I think Strategic Music was talking about it too, about making something cool, making something interesting. Don't do the same thing that everyone else is doing. If there's a graveyard, yeah, okay, wolves howling and witches and all of that, yeah, but can you do something else that's like, oh, unexpected, like a 12-tone row, So have several sections and moods. Include a bridge. I mean, so few songs that I hear have like a C section, It's just a theme, and then maybe a B, and back to a theme, chorus, verse, chorus, verse. But it's so fun to throw in some like unexpected in a different key or whatever it is. Vary each theme repetition slightly. Don't just copy paste, but just add little ornamentation or whatever it is. Change the key randomly. One of my crazy professors at Sonoma State University, where I went, he's like this mad scientist, and I love him. He would just be like, oh, well, just, play a measure of E flat in there. And I'm like, but we're in D, or whatever. It's just like, no, you can't do that. But it like amazingly can work, just a moment of like shift and change. Find and exploit the magic in every moment. This sounds really stupid. And I don't know, metaphysical or something, but listen to the track and just think, like, what can I do in that 5 seconds that's really interesting and cool? You know, that's like, if you make every moment like that, the track is going to be killer. The melody's going to be great. The music's going to be great. Think out of tempo sometimes, you know, just write something aleatorically, right? It's not just out of tempo, completely out of tempo. Don't get stuck in this MIDI world where everything is 1, 2, 3, 4, you know. Just do something completely outside tempo. Have a grand pause or a fermata, you know, a moment of like, you don't know when the song's going to start again. Make sure you phrase through rest. So instead of like ending the melody on, you know, okay, that's the melody. Have a couple moments of rest where it's hanging on, like, you know, on re, do, ti, la, or whatever, you know. Don't always complete everything expectedly. Have unexpected accents, you know. Make all the instruments strike together in ways that, oh, wow, what's that? And put some sound effects in your music is another fun thing. So like when I did a zombie game, I have little zombie sounds and all of that. One of the ones that I love is for Backyard Bounce, which involves like a basketball and going through a hoop, basically. I added the bouncing basketball going in the hoop at the end as part of the music. So it's, you know, something fun that you can do to turn non-musical things into music, because that became like a percussion element, basically. Not just atmospheric, but actually rhythmic. So don't be a compositional stereotype. Don't always use 4/4 and 3/4. So this track that I made has bars in 13/8, 12/8, and 4/4. So it makes it a little bit more interesting. So do fun things like that. Mix and change the meter and tempo. So, you know, change it all over the place. As my crazy professor, Will Johnson was his name, by the way, is his name. He has a wonderful accent. And he always says, well, you know, you just got to play around. So your left hand, you're going to use the white keys, and your black on the right hand, you know. And just crazy ideas, things that you'd never think to do. And he'd be like, just throw a measure of 5/4 in there, you know. So I try to do that when I can, and that's a good way to be different. Don't always compose in C major, okay? Please. There are 12 keys, really. Use unexpected instruments. That's a fun thing. Whenever I get a new library, I play with instruments that I've never heard of. I look them up on Wikipedia. I'm like, what is this? Like, I don't even know. And make yourself use it for something. Tell a unique story, right? Next, don't become a tool of your tools. Okay, so a lot of times you get stuck in a rut, I think, of like always using the same thing. I used to use, happy little button there. I used to use Giga Studio until it was discontinued, and I loved it, and I got really stuck on it though, and so I never really used a lot else. And then when it kind of stopped being updated and all of that, I switched to Contact, which was awesome because there's this whole new orchestra that I had to work with. And so ever since then, I realized, okay, I need to not get stuck with one tool. So I started using all sorts of different tools. And every once in a while, I'll just go through my computer because, you know, you install a lot of stuff and you forget about it. And I'm like, what is this? You know, and sometimes I have to look it up on Google. I don't even know what it is, you know. I look it up, oh, this sounds cool, and then I load it up and play it. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can hear so many things. So force yourself to use other tools. So these are two tools. This was a Nintendo all 8-bit like plugin that I found. And so I wrote this. So those sounds sound familiar, I'm sure, to anyone who played that system. So it was so fun to write that way in this limited way because everything had to be so important. You know, there's no extraneous notes, or it was just like total cacophony. And it's all monophonic. Each line you cannot have chords, so it makes it really fun. And then this one, I loaded up Native Instruments FM8, which I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. And I made this robots track. So every single track in there was just from Native Instruments FM8, which is a weird little instrument to use because you have to load like an instance of it for every track. So it was a little bit odd to use, but it turned out great. And I would have never written that with my other tools. So try using another sequencer that you don't normally use. Try using another sample library. Use another input method. If you normally play everything in, sit down and type it all into the staff. You know, get a voice to MIDI tool where you can sing a melody. Get a MIDI guitar if you play any guitar. Even if you don't, you're going to do things like interesting that you wouldn't normally do. And change the order of your writing. So if you write the rhythm first, or if you write the melody first usually, change the order, and you'll come up with different things. Because every tool has its purpose, right? And you won't know it until you start using it. Okay, so speaking of tools, please don't overuse loops. This is a really big one for me because people send me stuff and I'm like, I have that too. You know, I can press a button and do that. And this is especially true with percussion. It drives me nuts when people don't make their percussion tracks note by note. You know, I understand that like complex Indian music or African rhythms or all the, you know, those are really difficult, but it might benefit you to learn the basics of those. So maybe you can start making, you know, some of your own sequences, because I love to write my own percussion tracks and vary it just slightly, right, to keep it really interesting. I won't have the same hi-hat pattern forever. You know, I'll have a 16-bar phrase instead of these loops, which are often 2 bars or maybe 4 bars, maybe 8 if you're lucky. They're great. Loops are great, and they can be used sparingly. But if you use a percussion loop for a whole track, it's just not very interesting and unique. And I would urge you to try to break out of your shell and learn a little bit and do it a different way. So that is that. So everyone's a teacher. Don't miss opportunities to learn from other people's music. So I, you know, carry my iPhone around, and sometimes I hear something I really like, and I'll just record it. You know, and I'm not going to plagiarize it, but I like the way that, you know, the bass rhythm works against the keyboard or whatever it is. It's a different groove that I'm not used to, and I'll use that in a song, guaranteed. I will use that somewhere. I force myself to like, okay, when am I going to use this? So this is one here, the color ball theme, that I took the bass, drums, and rhythm, not in the same key, but in the same kind of pattern. So that kind of thing. because I wouldn't normally write like that. This is the reggae beat, which is really cool, but not quite reggae. It's like indoor club reggae. It's like a different. I don't know what that is, but I like it. Um, so play other people's games. Play your audio competitors' games. Play your other game developers' games. What works for you? What doesn't? Be honest. Just think, wow, that's awesome. I'm going to do that. Or that doesn't work. This is why. Use Spotify. I love Spotify. Does everyone use Spotify in here? Oh, gosh. It's such a missed opportunity. I mean, I used to use, what was it, Rhapsody? It's still around. But you have to pay, and, Pandora is cool, but, like, kind of limited in genre. Spotify is like, you can create playlists of music that you want to hear, and they have so much stuff on there. And it's free. So it's like, I mean, you can buy, I think, whatever. There's no ads or whatever, but it's in really good quality, and you can, sample all sorts of things. So that's something I use all the time. Play in a musical group if you don't already, because you'll learn so much from other musicians, and you'll learn a lot from participating in that too. I sing in the Golden Gate Men's Chorus in San Francisco, and I have for 6 years, and it's a high-level chorus where we have to do really difficult music, and I have to stretch my brain, and it's a big part of why I can do what I do. Come up with different melodies for years and years and years and not run out of ideas. Study with someone better than you are. That's big too. I have a voice teacher that humbles me all the time. And if you can find a good composition teacher to work with, or a piano teacher, whatever your discipline is, it's very important. So be efficient and sustainable, and some of you have heard this tip from me before, but don't ever throw anything away. So I write things for developers, and sometimes they don't like it. And so I'm like, all right, that's fine, I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to use that later, And a lot of times it's not going to suit another game, because you want to make sure it's customized for the game that you're working on. But you can change the instrumentation, you can change the tempo, you can use certain sections of it that you didn't think would be prominent in the other game. But it's really important because if you throw things away, you're wasting time, and then it feels like a real headache when you're not having good communication with the developer. So I'm not going to play these clips because I think I'm probably way over time. But so I use the same template for Ravenwood Fair, Wonder Village, and Dino Life, 3 games I worked on, and they sound completely different. But the templates already have in there the delay settings, the reverb settings, the tracks are all loaded to instances of contact. Whatever I have in the instrumentation is basically there. So if you start from a blank slate every time, it takes like 10, 15 minutes or whatever, and then maybe one of the plugins will crash and you have to reload your computer, right? We've all been there. So I really recommend that you keep not just one template, but a lot of templates. So this template is my foresty template. Worldy, foresty template. But I have another one for like battle-y template and, whatever it is. So that'll save you a lot of time. Don't overuse sound effects and use the right ones. So one thing I hear in tracks all the time is too much reverb, like so much reverb, like in here, and this is a cool room. But I don't want my game to sound like this necessarily. A lot of games take places in very small rooms or tight quarters, and you want it to sound like that. So don't add reverb. Reverb is beautiful because it masks all sorts of problems. It masks wrong notes. It masks bad samples. It's the same thing for a chorus or an orchestra in a hall. We all fear singing in a dead hall because you can't make any mistakes. You can't breathe in the wrong place. You can't go off voice. Same thing in your composition. Don't rely on reverb to make it sound good. Play it completely dry and see what needs to be changed. I've found that delay works a million times better than reverb. So just a very, very, very small, not length of time, but a very quiet delay, and change the length of time based on the tempo, and maybe add multiple delays. One at a quarter note, one at a half note, that kind of thing. Or else you'll end up with audio oatmeal. Don't normalize your music and sound effects. It drives me nuts when I get that. Everything's totally loud or over compressed. And what I do is I play the music track, that's going to occur in a certain screen, and I play every sound effect and every voice cue that could possibly happen in that time. And it just has to be balanced really well. And if you normalize all the sound effects, they're going to be way too piercing. And also educate developers about this, because developers do this all the time, where they take your assets and they normalize everything and all of that. So I always tell everyone, like, if you want anything done, please let me know. I'm happy to do it, because in the end, I want like a good product. Do play with every single effect that you can get your hands on, but just don't overuse them. Use like one or two, per track. So this is my EQ disaster zone. So don't add to a certain area. Like if you want something to be bassier, don't add bass. It seems really not what you think your mind would want to do. I want to add bass. Subtract everything else. So a lot of you are like, yeah, I know this, but some people don't know this. Subtractive EQ is when you take out everything else to make something louder. And a good way to do it is to figure out what frequency you don't like in something, is to play it and real time, just like scroll along like a negative, 20 or whatever, all the way down, and just see what that makes it sound like until you find, oh, that really doesn't change the track very much. Well, you can probably lower the frequency there, because this is like some dead space that you don't need. So that's subtractive EQing. So this is going to be talked about at 1 o'clock as well, more, so I'll just mention it. But a big thing is miscommunication. So make sure you're on the same page with the developer. Make sure that you ask a lot of questions and don't assume that they want anything if you're not sure, especially when I work with the developer for the first time. As I have repeat clients, I know what they want generally, but you just never sometimes they don't know what they want too, and so the conversation can help clarify that. So this is recently someone wanted me to make a robots game, and they said, well, just make a robot track. Okay, so Terminator, or is this like cute like Android robot, or is this like Star Wars robot, or there's a lot of different things you can do with that. And so I didn't do what he wanted at all, so I had to redo it. So this is just an example of like, there's a lot of different type of robots, like you may know this one.
She's a small wonder, lovely and
remember that show.
She's a small wonder.
I was happy I found that clip.
Like other girls. She's a miracle, and I grant you.
Yeah. So, joke aside, you can have a lot of interpretations of what a robot is, or, what everything else is. So most importantly, in conclusion, put time, thought, love, passion, energy into making it. We get bogged down with deadlines a lot and want to just like get things out. But it's really important to go back to them, put more love into them, put sparkle, whatever it is. Review your work later, because you're going to hear things that you didn't hear when you're sitting down for 10 hours writing something. Know your limitations, know what you're not good at, but also believe in yourself that you can do it. Like, look it up, research, make mistakes, but don't make them again. Learn from your mistakes and have fun making music. And that is all.